I swear John is calling in from New Orleans instead of Cuba. But author John Thorndike is joining us to talk about his latest novel. It's called A-Hundred-Fires in Cuba. It's a complex love story. It's set in Havana and Miami in the late 50s during the Cuban Revolution, and we're super excited to have him join us here on Big Blend Radio's first Authors Happy Hour show with JKS Communications today. And he's going to talk and also how this connects back to his mom. And you can go to his website, johnthorndike.com. He's on Facebook. He's on Instagram. Of course, you can get the book on Amazon, all those great places. But welcome, John. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Hey, it is good to have you on the show. Really good to have you on the show.
Very glad to be here.
So where are you based out of?
I'm in Athens, Ohio, where I've been most of the last 40 years. I moved here when my son was 3 years old and lived out west for a while, but this is my real home, Athens, Ohio.
Yeah, and you got into the world of farming and construction, and you've had an interesting career looking at your life. I mean, because you also were overseas as well for part of your life.
Yeah, I went in the Peace Corps and then married a woman from El Salvador, and she had a very hard time. She was a schizophrenic, and so I wound up with our son when he was 2.5. But we had been living down in Chile for a couple of years, and as you say, back to the land, out to live in a very primitive way. It was the great adventure of my life, really.
Wow, and you lived in Chile for a while too, right?
Yeah, I lived in Chile for 2 years, and then I was in Central America for another 3 or 4 or 5 years, really.
Wow, that's amazing. It's amazing, And
that's
so
where
now
I started to.
Go ahead.
That's where I started to read about Cuba. You're down in Central America, and things are going on. I lived in a building there. I hadn't thought about this for years, where there were some Cuban refugees. This was 1967, and those were the first real Cubans I met from that time.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, when you think about, these connections we have and the fact that you've lived in these different places and, stretched your wings over the years, and you start to think, okay, now I'm going to go back in history in Cuba, and then you get into also your family history with your mom being part of this story. This is really interesting, but I want to kind of go back a few more steps, too, because it also is in some ways kind of connects with your dad, too, because Nancy and I were talking about this before you even called in, that, we dug into our family history, and basically no matter where we turn, on both sides, on my father's side, her family side, our side, everywhere we turn, someone has the ink attached to them. There's, typesetter or writer, publisher, and it seems that that's kind of touched you, too, through the years.
Yeah, primarily through my dad on that. I mean, my mother was a great reader, she read the novels and the more emotional books. But my dad had been a journalist all his life. He worked for Henry Luce at Time Inc. He then went to work for Life. He was the managing editor of Life in the late 40s.
Wow.
And so yes, that the ink was there. And that's what it was in those days, ink.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying, ink.
The switch from non-ink to virtual
right.
was a big, oh no, now we like it, but at first it was like, oh man.
I still like to pick up a pen and have ink on my hands because I just feel like, okay, I'm in there. What led you to start writing? Because this is not your first book, and I know Nancy's in love with your writing. What got you started?
Well, this was a kind of combination on a couple of things. I had written a book about my dad. I went to live with him in his last year and take care of him. He had Alzheimer's, and I spent that year with him. And then in the middle of it, I was just so stunned by what was happening to him and to his mind that I thought, I've got to write this down. And I started keeping a journal and whatnot, and that led to a book about him called The Last of His Mind. And after I had written that book, I thought, well, I've got to write a book about my mother. I was actually closer to my mother, and she had a tragic story. She died at the age of 57. And I thought, I want to write a book about her. Actually, what I wanted to do was give her another life, another chance at another life, which is why this book A-Hundred-Fires in Cuba, she was the impulse for the book. The character turns out to be quite a different woman from my mother. But I started with a woman who was, 26. That was before I was born, and I gave my mother a whole different trajectory in this book. I got fascinated by this character, Camilo Cienfuegos, who's one of the. Camilo is someone that few people in the United States know about, unless you go to Miami. But most people don't know about him. And in Cuba, he's absolutely as well known as Che Guevara.
Wow.
The reason that we don't know about him is that he came into Havana on the first day of January 1959. And it was only 10 months later and he was head of the Cuban army. Fidel made him head, not Che, not his brother, but Camilo. That's how important he was, and much loved by the Cuban people. But only 10 months later, he got on a plane and took off on an overland flight from the city of Camagüey to Havana. The plane disappeared. He was never seen again. It's a matter of intense debate to this day what happened to him.
Wow.
That's why
and
we don't
he was
know
also lively, wasn't he, compared to, now? Like he was really kind of like a boisterous character versus to like Castro. Like he was, let's go party. Like he would go to happy hour show with us.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely he would. And all the rest of them, Fidel, Raul, Che Guevara, these guys, they would drink a little bit. Fidel didn't like too much drinking, but absolutely none of them were dancers, and only Camilo was a dancer. He was a real, he'd never gone to the university as all the rest of them had. He was a man of the people, and he loved to party and have fun, and that's why he was so beloved by the people. When that plane disappeared, the people poured into the streets when they heard about it, and the whole country just stopped for 3 days. He was much loved.
So where was he flying from and to when the plane disappeared? Do you know?
This is a bit of a complex story, so I'm going to get deep into it. But he had been sent by Fidel down to the town of Camagüey to arrest another comandante, one of the early commanders, named Uber Matos. And he was a guy who had given his everything to the revolution, but then did not like the direction that Castro was going and wanted to retreat. He said, I support you completely. I just want to retreat. I don't really want to be part of this anymore. Well, he couldn't do that. Fidel put him in jail for 20 years. He served 20 years to the day. Hey, they didn't shoot him, but he served 20 years and then went to see his wife and family who were down in Costa Rica. And so at that time it was Camilo who was entrusted with going and arresting this guy. Fidel wanted Camilo to show that he was not on Uber's side. He would arrest one of his best friends. And that's why he got on that plane. And it's why, if you go to Cuba, as I did, everyone says, a storm came up and blew that plane out to sea, and it disappeared without a trace. And if you go to Miami, as I did recently to the Miami Book Fair, most everybody there thinks that Fidel Castro had him killed. He was too popular, not enough of a communist, too much a friend of Uber Matos, just dangerous in some way. And I'll just say here now that I've read absolutely everything I can on this debate, and there is no direct evidence. I'll also say that if you want to know really what happened to him, read my book.
See, everybody, there you go. Now you're writing this love story. Now you're getting a love story, but your mom is like part of this. This is interesting, and she's a photographer that goes over there after she's met him, right, and later finds him, right? So this is this story, that's kind of a takeoff of your mom. What's it like writing a love story with your mom being that main character?
Well, the fact is that I started out. It started out being my mother, and then she spins off, as happens when you're writing a book. You have some control, but you can't have too much control, because once you start inventing the characters, they've got their own will and their own ways and their own interests, and off they go. And so by the time the book is underway, it's not my mother at all. She was the one who drove me to create Claire Miller, the woman in the book. But indeed, she becomes an entirely different woman, and that's why I'm writing another novel that will truly follow my mother's life. And so the question is perfectly germane to me to this day, because I'm writing this story of much closer to what happened to my mother. And it's a little delicate. Who was it? Some writer said, you must write as if your parents were dead. Meaning, write your real story. Take the true story. Don't be held back by what your parents are going to think of you. Well, both my parents are dead, but I have a cousin who I think won't like how I portray my mother. I'm portraying her exactly as she was, in my opinion. But
people see other people in different ways. So what your cousin might see about a relative is always going to be different than what you see.
Yeah.
That's true.
And I think that's a good thing.
And people show different sides to different people.
Exactly. Like sometimes, if you're more comfortable with this person talking about these subjects, that's what you'll talk about, but you would never think about talking about those subjects with another person.
Exactly.
So how people
really...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. That's why I have to write the very intimate, close story of my mother, because she's the parent who talked to me about those things.
That's awesome, though. To me, this is when you can connect that way through writing and having integrity with this. Writing is integrity, and that's why I think it's. We always talk about how it's like you sweat. It's blood, sweat, and tears when you do it, because it's like, do I really want to do that? I do. I know I need to, and it's. And then some of that you think you need to, and then the editor comes and goes, no, sorry, that's getting cut off. How does that feel?
Let me just chop your leg off.
I do want to ask, did you go to Cuba? Because, if you did, I'm really jealous, and I hope you did, because you wrote about it.
Yeah. No, I did. I went down there. You can always go to Cuba. It's been done for 25 years. You can go through Bahamas or you go through Mexico, and Cuba will not stamp your passport. But I was a bit leery of that, and so I signed up with a group by the author Tom Miller, wrote a great book called Trading with the Enemy, and he took a bunch of us who were interested in books in Cuba and took us down there. I didn't stick with the group very much, frankly. I had so many things I needed to investigate because I'd written most of the book already, and I wanted to check all the scenes, and it was a wonderful thing, and I wish we'd open up completely to go to Cuba, and I highly recommend it. I'd like to go back and stay there for a couple, 3 months. It's a fascinating country. It really is.
And I think it's going to go through so much change now, too. It's changing, and I hope that it manages to maintain integrity through it. That's the word of the day, apparently, integrity. That and strawberries, but integrity in regards to, not getting overrun with negative tourism. There's positive tourism, responsible tourism, and tourism that can really help Cuba, but at the same time, I hope it just manages to keep what it wants to keep. It's up to them what they want to do. So it's interesting. It's interesting. Now, John, are you ready to play Happy Hour? Because the Happy Hour bell is coming down. It's time.
Oh, there it is, right there.
Yes, you do have one. So our favorite question And this is our favorite show, Happy Hour. Now we just have one that's themed with authors, right? So the favorite question is, if you could spend happy hour with anyone alive or passed on, or it could be fictional, because, especially with authors on the show, who would it be? Where would you spend it? Anywhere in the world. What are you going to drink? It could be alcoholic or non. And the most important thing is, what are you talking about? Because we want to be a fly on the wall. Both of us, we can each be our own fly. And we want to hear everything. We want to know.
Well, I'm going to offer a couple because my first instinct was, because I'm rereading The Maytrees, this fabulous book by Annie Dillard, and I want to I don't want to sit down anywhere. I want to walk on the beaches of Cape Cod with Annie Dillard, who wrote this book that I absolutely love. However, we're talking all about Cuba, and I could actually somehow wind up talking to Annie Dillard someday, but the one I really want to talk to is Camilo Cienfuegos.
Yes.
Oh, I would ask him all kinds of questions. We would be talking about his whole life in Cuba. He would be having a rum and something, probably. I would be having a cup of deep, rich Cuban coffee. And we would talk. I think we would be, this is kind of giving a little hint away, but I think we would be in Costa Rica, and we would be talking all about what happened in his life and my crazy inventions, and it would be a long talk.
Oh, I like this. And you did drop a little hint there.
Yeah, you
Everybody, you didn't hear that, but there's good coffee there too, is what I'm saying. Yeah. Good coffee is important in life. If you don't have good coffee, like, I'm running for the hills somewhere for more coffee. But very
Cuba's
cool.
great
I like
for
this.
coffee.
I know, man. It's like, I can't say I know because I haven't been there. I've just really wanted to go. But we appreciate you joining us. Please keep us posted on the next book. It's exciting that you're writing one. I can't wait to get my hands on from Nancy, because she's got 100 Fires in Cuba. Everybody's out now. And 100 Fires in Cuba, you got a reason why it's called that.
Well, Camilo Cienfuegos, Cienfuegos is 100 fires. So that just poured into the title of the book. Yeah.
That's a good title. As soon as I saw that, I was like, dude, what's going on? I want to know.
It's a hot book.
It's hot. It's hot, everyone. Check it out. You can get it on Amazon, Goodreads, all those places. But I always say go to the author's website, and you can learn more about John's amazing career as well, his writings, his essays, his other books. Go to johnthorndike.com. And, John, we're going to play a song for you. We like to play songs for our guests, and this one is called History, because it's about history. And this album is called Adventure from Elliot Lewis. And Elliot Lewis is a guitar player for Hall & Oates. And he is one of the musicians for Daryl's House. And he's just an awesome guy. And this is his first solo album, Adventure. And it is about life and love. And I figured this isn't Cuban music, but it's music about history, life, and love. And that fits your theme of your book, 100 Fires in Cuba. So everyone, here it is, history. Thank you so much for joining us, John.
Thank you so much, and I really enjoyed it.
You too. Take care. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm taking my time. I gotta get inside this feeling, walking a line we never thought we'd be seeing. And on the horizon, all I see is you forever. Nothing but time. I bear my soul of this surrender here and now. Don't wanna go through life too blind to see. You should be the one standing next to me. never thought would lead to this road. Guess I've traveled all my life. Now I know